chapter. We often have scripture this long, 20 some odd verses, but these verses happen to be long. And the reason I chose it all was because very seldom in Romans do you have an entire chapter devoted to one thing. They're kitchen sink kind of chapters. This is not one of them. So we're going to celebrate that fact today. So bear with me and we'll get through it. Welcome with open arms, fellow believers who don't see things the way you do. And don't jump all over them every time they do or say something you don't agree with, even when it seems that they are strong opinions but weak in the faith department. Remember, they have their own history to deal with. Treat them gently. For instance, a person who has been around for a while might be convinced that he can eat anything on the table, while another, with a different background, might assume all Christians should be vegetarians and eat accordingly. But since both are guests at Christ's table, wouldn't it be terribly rude if they fell to criticizing what the other ate or didn't eat? God, after all, invited them both to the table. Do you have any business crossing people off the guest list or interfering with God's welcome? If there are corrections to be made or manners to be learned, God can handle that without your help. Or say, one person thinks that some days should be set aside as holy, and another thinks that each day is pretty much like any other. There are good reasons either way. So each person is free to follow the convictions of conscience. What's important in all this is that if you keep a holy day, keep it for God's sake. If you eat meat, eat it to the glory of God and thank God for prime rib. If you're a vegetarian, eat vegetables to the glory of God and thank God for broccoli. None of us are permitted to insist on our own way in these matters. It's God we are answerable to, all the way from life to death and everything in between, not each other. That's why Jesus lived and died and then lived again, so that he could be our master across the entire range of life and death, and free us from the petty tyrannies of each other. So where does that leave you when you criticize a brother? And where does that leave you when you condescend to a sister? I'd say it leaves you pretty silly, or worse. Eventually, we're all going to end up kneeling side by side in the place of judgment facing God. Your critical and condescending ways aren't going to improve your position there one bit. Read it for yourself in Scripture. As I live and breathe, God says, every knee will bow before me, every tongue will tell the honest truth that I and only I am God. So tend to your knitting. You've got your hands full just taking care of your own life before God. Forget about deciding what's right for each other. Here's what you need to be concerned about: that you don't get in the way of someone else, making life more difficult than it already is. I'm convinced, Jesus convinced me, that everything as it is in itself is holy. We, of course, by the way we treat it or talk about it, can contaminate it. If you confuse others by making a big issue over what they eat or don't eat, you're no longer a companion with them in love, are you? These, remember, are persons for whom Christ died. Would you risk sending them to hell over an item in their diet? Don't you dare let a piece of God, blessed food, become an occasion of soul poisoning. God's kingdom isn't a matter of what you put in your stomach, for goodness sake. It's what God does with your life as he sets it right, puts it together, and completes it with joy. Your task is to single-mindedly serve Christ. Do that and you'll kill two birds with one stone, pleasing the God above you and proving your worth to the people around you. So let's agree to use all our energy in getting along with each other. Help others with encouraging words. Don't drag them down by finding fault. You're certainly not going to permit an argument over what is served or not served at supper to wreck God's work among you, are you? I said it before and I'll say it again. All food is good, but it can turn bad if you use it that way. If you use it to trip others up and send them sprawling. When you sit down to a meal, your primary concern should not be to feed your own face, but to share the life of Jesus. So be sensitive and courteous to the others who are eating. Don't eat or say or do things that might interfere with the free exchange of love. Cultivate your own relationship with God, but don't impose it on others. You're fortunate if your behavior and your belief are coherent, but if you're not sure, if you notice that you are acting in ways inconsistent with what you believe, some days trying to impose your opinions on others, other days just trying to please them, then you know that you're out of line. If the way you live is inconsistent with what you believe, then it's wrong. A picture-perfect Pauline text basically sums up what Paul's all about. Now, I hear you thinking it already as you look down at your journeys. So what does he know about labor? And for the most part, you're right. After all, I'm a guy. And as such, the only real bodily pain I've had to endure was during a drug-induced slumber as a physician reamed out my sinuses and chipped away at my deviated septum. Now, don't get me wrong, it was far from a cakewalk, but I didn't have to go through the procedure awake. My only close encounter with real maternal labor was when Sarah and I were going to enter parenthood for the first time. As the brave father and birthing coach, I dutifully accompanied my wife to the OR for her C-section, only to be escorted out and placed in her original hospital bed until full consciousness returned. Imagine the surprise of our families as the bed was rolled into the room with no mother and baby, just a slightly disoriented new dad. So I guess that probably doesn't count, does it? Today is Mother's Day, a day that all the world recognizes the mothers in our midst and devotes the entire day to their service. It is one time out of the year that we honor Mom with wining, dining, flowering, gift giving, card showering, and anything else that we think might make our tribute more meaningful. Forget the fact that the following day is filled with our highly celebrated maternal guests, cleaning up the destroyed kitchen, watering and tending to those flowers that are almost dead anyway, trying to find space for all these less than desired gifts, displaying the cards which will have to be thrown away in the coming days, and all the other post-celebration chores. Now I say these things with a little sarcasm, realizing that this day is steeped in meaning and purpose. And I know that mothers everywhere are always gratified that they are remembered on this very special day. Over the past years, I've become aware of the history of this hallowed holiday and have come across some very interesting facts that you may or may not know. Our modern observance of Mother's Day is a celebration of motherhood, maternal bonds, and the influence of mothers in society. It is a complement to Father's Day, which, as you know, happens next month. The first Mother's Day was celebrated in Grafton, West Virginia on May 12, 1907, by a women's seminary graduate named Anna Jarvis, who held a memorial for her own mother, Anna Marie Reeves Jarvis, 2 years after her mother's death. Shortly thereafter, Jarvis campaigned to make Mother's Day a recognized holiday in the United States. And in 1914, she was successful in her efforts, and President Woodrow Wilson signed the congressional bill making Mother's Day a recognized holiday. That's Mother's Day in its singular possessive form, the celebration of one's own mother and not mothers in general. She was abundantly clear on that fact. Note the apostrophe. She would sue you if you got it wrong. Since that time, other countries have adopted the holiday as well. 161 out of 196 of them, to be exact. Most celebrate